Well, hello everybody and welcome back. As always, it's really nice to have you here. We're sincerely hoping that you're doing all right, and we're also hoping that you're ready to learn something new about V-Ray for Cinema 4D. Because in this tutorial, we're going to be leveraging the V-Ray fur object for the very first time to create a nice little carpet that we're going to place right in front of our sofa here. So that's going to be the task at hand. And let's not beat around the bush. Let's just go straight at it. So what we're going to want to do first here is we're going to want to bring in some sort of a base geometry onto which we're going to place our V-Ray fur. Now this base geometry can really be anything. It could be a cube primitive, it could be a cylinder object, it could even be some complex custom polygonal shape. The workflow is always going to be the same. Now, given the scene that we're dealing with here, we do think that the best option for us here is going to be to create this nice little circular base geometry because we want our carpet to look, well, like this circular carpet. Okay, so we're gonna bring in a nice little disk object into our scene, and that's going to be our base geometry here. So what we're gonna do next here is we're just gonna move it into place. So we're gonna move it right in front of the sofa here. Now maybe we could make it just a little bit bigger so we can up the outer radius amount to 130 centimeters or so. And then, the disk object is kind of by default, it comes in with this low poly setting. So we're going to want to up the rotation segment to maybe 128. Okay. And that's going to take care of that nice shape that we want, that nice circular shape. Now, as you can see, the disk object is intersecting with the floor. That's not what we want. That's really not going to work well for us here. So let's just move it up the y-axis a little bit. So let's maybe move it up by 0.08 centimeters or so. And I think that'll work just great for us here. Yep, looking great. Okay, so now our base geometry is all set up here. And now we can start thinking about bringing in the V-Ray fur object. How do you do that? It's real easy. All you need to do is you need to go under the V-Ray menu up here, under geometry, and then just bring in the V-Ray fur object. Now, as you do that, you're going to notice that our base geometry there's still no fur on it. So we're going to need to set things up here, but it's going to be real simple. You'll see. So to get the V-Ray fur to show up on our base geometry here, what we want to do is we want to select the V-Ray fur object. We want to go under the general menu here, and in here, you're going to see that you have this objects input field, okay? And into this field, you want to place the objects that you want to populate with the V-Ray fur, okay? So in our case, this is going to be our disk object. So we're just going to plug it into the objects input field here. And just like that, look at that. We have our V-Ray fur rendering real beautifully here. But obviously, as you can see, our carpet is not really looking like a carpet. It's looking more like a meadow. So we are going to want to tweak some of the parameters inside the V-Ray fur object. So let's get our camera a little closer to the carpet just so we can see what's happening a little bit better. So maybe like an angle like this will work fine for us here. Let's set up a nice region render and let's talk about some of the basic parameters that we're going to want to tweak here. Okay, so immediately, as you can see, we have these really long, lengthy hair strands. They're kind of super thick as well, and there's not enough of them. There's a lot of empty space between the hair strands themselves. So what we're going to want to tweak here first is probably the hair count. So let's select the V-Ray fur object. Let's go under the general menu again, and let's talk about the distribution parameters. Okay. So the distribution mode parameters you see right here, by default, it comes set to the per area mode. And this is exactly what we'll want here because this mode will distribute hair strands evenly across our entire object. Now, if you want to change the distribution mode, you can. You have the option to use the per face distribution mode, and that just means that you're going to distribute hairs on a per face basis, if you will. But again, we want our hair strands to be distributed evenly across the entire object. So the per area mode here is gonna work perfectly for us. Okay. Now to up the hair count, we're gonna want to mess with the hairs per unit area parameter in here. Right now it's set to 0.1. If we up it to 1, look at that. We're going to have a lot more hairs on our carpet here. Okay, but if we look closely at the rendered image, you're going to notice that, well, even though these hair strands are kind of lengthy and still they're super thick, there's still empty space between them, right? So I think we're going to have to up the hair count even more here. So let's just 10x this value here. Let's up it from 1 to 10, hit enter, and we'll see the interactive render update. Now, obviously what we're seeing right now is it's a bit of a mess. We have a lot of intersecting hair strands. They're super lengthy and they're super thick, but I think the hair count might work. So let's talk about the length of these hairs here next. All right. So you can control the length of the hairs of the individual hair strands with the length parameter here. So by default, the length is set to 15 centimeters. And I don't know what kind of carpets you have at home, but hair strands that are 15 centimeters long, that does not sound like a carpet to me. So let's lower this parameter here down to 2 centimeters. Let's see how that looks like. And that looks much more like a carpet would look like, right? But now if you look real closely, you're going to notice that we still have a lot of intersecting hair strands. They're not as long as before, but they're still super thick. Okay, so we're going to want to mess with the thickness parameter next here. So right now it's set to 0.2 centimeters. Let's just lower it down to 0.1 centimeters. Let's see how that's going to look like. And that looks much, much better, right? But I think we could still lower it by, well, let's just divide it by 2. Let's see how that's going to look like. Okay, and notice how the interactive renderer can be of great use to you here, because you can just creatively play with these parameters, and in a second or two, they're going to update right in the interactive renderer. So this whole process can become this really nice, not so frustrating creative process, right? Because the interactive renderer is working, well, basically in real time here, right? Okay, so the thickness parameter being set to 0.05 centimeters, I think that'll work fine for us here. I think this is really starting to look like something. Maybe we could lower the length amount here to 1.25 centimeters. Let's see how that looks like. And again, we're just being creative at this point. But I think we've really hit some sweet spots here. Okay. Now, a small production or workflow tip, if you will. What I like to do sometimes when messing with the V-Ray fur object is I like to get close to one of the objects in the scenes that I can use as a scale reference. Okay, so I'm going to use this toy car model here as a scale reference. So I'm just looking at how these hair strands are looking in terms of their size and their thickness compared to the toy car model. And I think we've pretty much hit the sweet spot here. Obviously, it totally depends on the type of carpet you're trying to recreate here, right? We're going for this sort of nicely trimmed carpet look, okay? Okay, so besides the length and thickness parameters here, we also have the gravity parameter, we have the gravity vector parameter, the bend parameter, the taper parameter, and also the fur scale parameter. Now, we're not going to mess with any of these, okay? Because the defaults work really nice for us here. We would like to encourage you to play around with these on your own. They can produce some really nice looking effects. And in case you don't know what these do or the names aren't descriptive enough for you, well, then here's another tip. If you go to our docs.chaos web pages, okay, and if you go under the V-Ray fur subpage, and if you just scroll down, you're going to see that down here you have these sort of interactive previews of what each and every one of these parameters does. Okay, so you want to know what kind of an effect the gravity parameter is going to have on your V-Ray fur object? We'll just play around with these interactive sliders here. And it's going to be real easy to get a good idea of how the gravity parameter affects your V-Ray fur object. Want to know more about how the bend parameter affects your V-Ray fur object? Play around with this one. And you get this nice little interactive preview here, exactly showing you what this parameter does. Okay. Okay, so that's just a bit of a small tip there. Of course, you can always use the interactive render, play around with these settings, and just get to a desired look like that, right? Right. Okay, now we do have another set of parameters in here that we will want to take a look at, and these are the variation parameters. So these can be really important for whenever you want to add that final touch of realism to your, to your carpets, to your rugs, or whatever else you're trying to create using the V-Ray fur object. So let's maybe zero in on the length variation parameter here. So if we change our length variation parameter, if we set it to 0, okay, and if we let's just get a little closer to our carpet here. Okay, if we set our length variation parameter to 0 here, there's going to be no variation happening between the individual hair strands. All of the hair strands are now going to have the exact same length that we've set up here with the length parameter. So right now, all of these hair strands here are 1.25 centimeters in length. Okay. Now, if you up the length variation parameter, let's say you max it out at 1. Well, and now you're going to have a lot of variation between the individual hair strands. So some of them are going to be 1.25 centimeters in length. Others are going to be 0 centimeters in length. Okay, so that's how the variation parameters here work for all of these options. Okay, these options, these variation parameters here add variation to their corresponding parameters. So if your values are at 0, that means there's not going to be any variation happening. And if your values are at 1, there's going to be that full scale variation happening from 0 to whatever the amount you've set for that specific parameter. And intermediate values are, of course, the in-between values between the two extremes. All right, so then we also, well, before we continue, let's reset the length variation parameter here. Let's set it to 0.2 here. I think by default, all of these values, I mean, I like the look of the carpet that we've created here, so let's not mess with any of these parameters in here. But again, you're highly encouraged to do so on your own, depending on the type of a carpet that you're trying to recreate. Okay. Okay, now we do have another parameter in here that we're just quickly going to cover, and that's the curl parameter. So let's set up a nice render region here. Let's maybe isolate these set of hair strands here. Okay, now if we enable the curl parameter, everything's going to look identical as it was. But if we up the curl radius, if we up it to 0.1, well, now check this out. Our hair strands are starting to curl. Okay, and if we increase the curl radius, they're gonna curl even more, as you can see, right? Now, you want to set the number of curls? Well, that's why you have the number of curls parameter in there. Now they're gonna have 4 curls. Look at this. This is looking pretty intense, right? Right. So that's how the curl parameter affects your carpet. But looking at it, we won't really be needing it because I think the carpet looks quite all right as it is without the hair strands being curled by that curl parameter. So we're just exercising a little bit of that artistic license here. Okay, so with those parameters kind of covered now, let's focus on the next step in our carpet creation journey here, which is going to be the material creation step. So what we're going to do next here is we're just going to bring in a new V-Ray material. We're going to use the standard material. You can use nose if you so prefer. We're going to give it a proper name. We're going to call it a carpet material. And then let's start by giving it some sort of a diffuse color. Now I have a color already prepared here. I'm just going to sample it. It's going to be off screen for you, but you can see the color that I've used here. It's just this pinkish / rosish color, if you will. And now what we can do is we can apply this material to our disk object. Now that's going to take care of that base geometry there. But obviously we need to apply this material to our V-Ray fur object as well, because otherwise these hair strands don't have this material applied to them. So let's do that. Let's take this material, apply it to the V-Ray fur object, and there we go. Now our carpet has a material applied to it. Now this material, we can give it some basic, realistic qualities. So let's go under the reflection slot here, the reflection channel, and let's give this fabric material reflections, because if you'll remember from our previous tutorial, even fabric materials have a reflection component to them. Now that reflection component isn't as glossy as what you can see here, so we're just gonna lower the glossiness down to say 0.1. This is a value that I default to typically for all of my fabric materials, but feel free to experiment depending on the type of fabric material that you're trying to create. But I find the value of 0.1 to be a good starting point for most fabric materials. Okay, so then what we could do next here is, well, we could also add some sort of a sheen component to our material. It's probably not going to make a huge difference, but you know, the carpet is a fabric material. It might have some micro strands catching highlights, and the sheen layer is pretty good at simulating that effect, right? So let's set up a bit of a render region here, okay? And then let's try turning on the sheen color to its full power. Okay, and as you can see, it does not make a huge difference, but it does make a little bit of a difference. So maybe we could do with a basic setup here. So let's just give the sheen some basic color that's derived from the sort of base color of our material here. Let's lower the saturation because we do want those highlights to be of a neutral color. It obviously does depend on the type of sheen you're trying to recreate though, so tweak it to whatever you see fit, to whatever you're trying to recreate. And then let's also lower the value. Maybe we can lower it down to 50%. Now again, this is not going to make a huge difference to our material, but it just adds that nice extra component to it. You know, why not? Okay. Okay, and with that done, we're pretty much done with our carpet material here. Okay, this is looking pretty cool, pretty great actually. So we're done with the material creation process here. Congratulations, everybody. Okay, now before we start concluding this tutorial, let's also showcase a couple of additional workflows that you can use with the V-Ray Fur object that are going to make creating patterns on your rugs, carpets, and furs and whatnot. It's going to make that pattern creation process real simple and really fun, actually. So if we select the V-Ray Fur object, and if we go under the textures menu here, okay, you're going to notice that you have a bunch of different, well, input fields and slots in here. But these are really useful because you can use them to map the strength of their corresponding parameters. And you can do that using shaders or bitmaps, okay? So if that sounds a little confusing, no worries. Let's demo it all because that'll make things super clear to you in just a second here in case you're a little bit confused. So let's focus on the length texture parameter here. What we're going to input into its input field here, into its slot essentially, is going to be we're going to use a checkerboard pattern. And as soon as we're going to plug it, you're going to be able to see that now we're essentially mapping this checkerboard onto our carpet. And because the checkerboard is, has black and totally black and totally white parts on it, you're going to notice that, parts of this carpet have hair strands that are at their full length and other parts where the length of those hair strands is basically 0. Okay, so hopefully you can immediately see how useful all of these parameters here can be, because now what you can do is you can really easily create patterns and custom shapes on your V-Ray Fur objects. Now, the mapping is kind of off here, so we are going to want to adjust it. And so to get the mapping looking the way you want to, you can use the length texture tag here. The workflow is exactly the same as it is when you're working with, for example, the V-Ray displacement and how you map that one. So what we need to do here is we need to select the disk object, okay? And then we're going to want to bring in a material tag. All right. Now, you probably want to give your material tag some sort of a sensible projection, given the object that you're dealing with, and then you can play with the length, U, and V values here. Okay. Then what you want to do is you want to take this tag and you want to plug it into the length texture tag slot here. Just drop it in there and look at that. Hopefully you can really, you're really starting to understand how really useful this workflow can be whenever you're trying to create custom patterns on your V-Ray Fur objects. Okay, and it's not just shaders that you can use here. You can use bitmaps as well, so you can paint something up in your painting application, and then just use that bitmap as a pattern that is going to drive the V-Ray Fur object. And we've obviously demoed the length parameter here. You could do the same with the thickness, with the gravity. All of these can be extremely useful. And it's given that you have the interactive renderers power at your disposal, you can sometimes just play around with these and see what kind of patterns and effects you can get going. So experimentation, again, is highly encouraged here. But all this said, this is not the only workflow that you can use to kind of create patterns and such. There's another workflow, and we're going to demo that next. So let's just delete the checkerboard here. Okay. Let's also delete the material tag or the texture tag here. And the workflow that we're going to show you relies on vertex maps. Okay. So we're going to have to bring in some vertex maps. And this workflow, by the way, is going to be really useful for you especially if you're working in the motion graphics industry, because this workflow is going to make it really easy to animate the patterns and the parameters on your V-Ray Fur objects. Okay, so first off, vertex maps. Okay, so we're going to select our disk object here, and we're going to add more disk segments to it. So we're going to add 128 disk segments here. Okay, because we need those polygons, we need those points. Then we're going to convert this disk into an editable piece of geometry. Let's just make sure that it has a lot of polygons. It does. Okay, and what we're going to do next is we're going to bring in a vertex color tag. We're going to apply it to our disk shape. We're going to go into its settings, and we're just going to apply it evenly across our object here. Okay, now with that done, we're going to go back into the V-Ray Fur object. We're going to again focus on the length texture parameter, and we're going to plug a vertex map into the slot this time, okay? And into the vertex map, we're going to plug the vertex color tag, okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to take the vertex color tag, and we're going to have it use fields, okay? We're going to delete the default freeze field because it's just going to get in the way for us here. I'm just going to delete it. And how about we create a box field here? Okay, let's just create a box field. You can see the representation here in the viewport as well. You can also see something starting to get rendered there. But let's set up our box field here. I'm just going to play with the offset a little bit. I'm just going to give it a really hard offset. And as you can see, the polygon count and the topology is going to be important for you here because, because of the topology that we have on our disk shape, we're getting some of these nasty jagged lines. We could get rid of these if we had more polygons, but we're kind of fine with it as it is. Now we're going to take this box field here and we're just going to make it smaller. Okay. And now if we take a look at the interactive renderer, look at that, So what we're doing here is we're essentially using fields in conjunction with vertex maps and vertex color tags, okay? And we're using them to create or to put custom shapes onto our carpet, essentially, okay? We're controlling that the hair strands length using both fields and vertex maps here. Okay, so now this can be incredibly useful because besides the obvious, you can create some really cool looking patterns here. Okay, and you can just play around with positioning fields in different ways, and you can create kind of fun patterns like that. But what's also really cool about this workflow is that it's really easy to animate this thing. So check this out. If I start moving this field here, look at that. We can easily animate the length of those hair strands, where the field is. Okay, so this can become really useful for all of you that are doing motion graphics. It's a really useful workflow, and you really, again, we're kind of repeating ourselves here, but you're really highly encouraged to play around with it because it can net you some really great results, right? And obviously, if you want to mess with the field itself, right? So if you play with the inner offset and such, you're going to get different looking effects, and it just comes down to playing around with everything and seeing how it all works. Okay, but for the task at hand here, I don't think these fields or these kinds of patterns are going to fit in our scene composition-wise all that much. So we're just going to delete all of that. We're also going to delete the vertex map in here. Just going to clear it. Okay. And with that, we're pretty much done here. Okay, so we've created our carpet here and we've explored a couple of additional workflows that you can use whenever you're creating these types of objects, okay, or whenever you're dealing with the V-Ray fur object. The V-Ray fur object is really versatile. It can be used in various different ways. You can even animate patterns on it. You can create different kinds of patterns on it real easily, as we just demoed. And so, hopefully you've learned something new here and something that you're going to be able to use in your upcoming projects. So that's it for this tutorial. Thank you so much for tuning in. It would mean a lot to us if you'd let us know what you think about these tutorials. You can voice your opinion in the comments below. We're always trying to improve and we're always looking for ways to deliver even better content to you all. Thanks again, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye-bye, everybody.